Governor, pleasure to have you. How you holding up?
I'm doing well. The voice is a little bit short, but other than that, everything else is doing well.
Polling is always all over the map, and there are wide potential swings for error here. But it looks good thus far. If you win, what do you think it means?
Well, I think it's a victory for courage, not only here in Wisconsin, but I think across the country. For years, I've heard people tell me, voters tell me, didn't matter if it was Democrat or Republican alike, people complaining that politicians at the local level, at the state level, particularly at the national level, didn't have the courage, didn't have the guts to take on tough issues. And it's, everybody knows we got to take these issues on, but politicians, when they get in office, failed to do that. To me, this victory tomorrow would be a victory for everyone across the country, in a local government, in a state government, and even those people like my friend Paul Ryan in Washington who are trying to do equally as courageous thing. It would be a victory to say that voters really do mean it when they say they want us to take on the tough issues.
What do you think of that Barack Obama has not been here?
Well, I think it's interesting. For all the hype, you know, President Clinton was here a week ago, and they asked me about it. I said it's more interesting to me that when the President of the United States is literally just on the other side of the St. Croix River in Minnesota, in the Twin Cities, when he was about the same time in Chicago, just south of the Wisconsin border.
He was a Marine One AAA.
Yeah, I think it's kind of confusing, I think, to voters here, because they wonder, why wouldn't you come in? 2 years ago, my same person I'm running against now was my opponent back then, and he came in and campaigned for the mayor at that point. I think it's a sign there's real concern, what I've seen over the weekend, which are voters who tell me they voted for my opponent, or they tell me they're Democrats, but in each case they tell me they're voting for me now either because they like the courage to take on the tough problems, or a number of them who are Democrats tell me they don't like the recall process. And my guess is the president and his folks just want to shy away from that.
You know, it's weird, Governor, when I look at polls in your state that show you and the president enjoy roughly the same 50+% approval ratings. That's weird.
Yeah, well, our state, like many in the Midwest, is fiercely independent. We're not strictly one party or the other. People like to vote for the person, and so I think some of it's driven by that. And I think part of it now is voters like that we were able to tackle these tough issues. Remember, it's been a year and a half that I've been under siege. I mean, last February and March, the national special interest groups from Washington in particular came in and poured money attacking me, bringing people in to attack me. It continued throughout the spring in the Supreme Court race, the state Senate recall elections in the summer, and all throughout last fall into early this year in terms of the recall petition itself. We've been under about a year and a half's worth of attacks, and yet we finally have gotten our numbers up above 50% because the truth is on our side. When people hear the truth, when they see the facts, when they see that our reforms are working, and it's helped create more jobs.
Your opponent says the reforms aren't working, and then it's about how many jobs are created or it's not created. Clearly the unemployment rate has ticked down 6.7% in the latest read, so you're below the national average, and that's the wind at your back. But regardless, if it's a close election, even with the wind at your back, and even if you win, close to half of those likely voting, if that is the case, if you just go by polls, feel it's not good enough. What do you say?
Well, I think it's part of that year and a half's worth of attacks. If we are able to move on and move forward after Tuesday's election, I think we get back to where we started, which was last January, overwhelmingly bipartisan support for our jobs initiatives. It wasn't until the national forces came in that you started to see a bit of a difference of opinion in here. We get back to that. We start helping small business again. I mean, think about this. 2 years ago, when I ran for governor, only 10% of our employers surveyed thought that Wisconsin was heading in the right direction. That same survey a couple months ago was conducted for 2012. 94% of our employers said Wisconsin was heading in the right direction. The biggest concern, though, they had on their list in terms of things that would keep them from hiring people in 2012 was the recall. They're concerned about the recall. They believe we're doing positive things. They believe we're moving the state forward, but they're scared to death that if the mayor got in, he'd take things backwards. And we saw that before. When my predecessor,
when you say take things backwards, that it would be a union-friendly environment,
no,
or that he would go back to collective bargaining rights, the kind of stuff unions disparage you?
Oh, I think it's even bigger than that. I think if you go back to what the mayor wants to do to completely undoing our reforms, going back to the old collective bargaining system, that's when a handful of big government union bosses were in charge at both the state and the local level. What we did was change that. We put the hardworking taxpayers in charge, not just in state government, but in every one of our local governments as well. That was good news for small businesses. That was good for property
taxes. Did you
taxpayers.
envision that it would get as rough as it did? I mean, they attack you, Governor, as coming in with this Machiavellian plan. On the stump, you said one thing, but when you came in, you were full barrel out to destroy unions, that you were, as one, I think, union leader said, out to disembowel them. What do you say?
Well, in our case, it's a clear difference between, I've had great partners in the private sector with private sector unions who are my partner in economic development. They worked with us in improving our infrastructure and improving cost-effective, reliable sources of power. They're even trying to help me streamline the process for safe and environmentally sound mining. My problem with public sector union leaders, the bosses, is they stood in the way of protecting the taxpayer. I knew for 8 years as a county official, I saw the biggest barrier to protecting core services for our people and still protecting the property taxpayers was out of control special interest. And so we really stood up, drew a line in the sand and said, I'm going to stand with the hardworking taxpayers. It's proven to be effective. First time in 12 years, property taxes went down on a median valued home in our state. Instead of having a $3.6 billion budget deficit, we have a $154 million budget surplus. And unlike my opponent in Milwaukee, where unemployment has gone up during his tenure 26%, largely because taxes and fees have gone up 43%, that's going backwards.
But the unions, counter that. As you know, Governor's saying you've done it on their back. It's not right. It's not fair.
Well, I'd say to any taxpayer out there who works outside of government, most of them would shake their head in disbelief at a statement like that, because what we did, my brother's a good example. I've got a younger brother, great guy, who works as a banquet manager at a hotel. He's a part-time bartender. His wife sells appliances at a department store. They got 2 daughters, my nieces, who are just beautiful. They are a typical middle-class family, not just here in Wisconsin, but I think across America. Last year, in the height of all this, he scratches his head and says to me, I pay more than $800 a month for my health insurance and the little bit I can set aside for my 401k. I'd love to have a deal like the one you're offering for public sector employees. They're matching their pension contribution, and they're paying 12.6% for the health insurance. Most of my hardworking taxpayers in this state pay anywhere from 20 to 25% of their health insurance. We are still offering a great deal.
You did mention that, and you campaigned on that in this recall. And now a lot of these union representatives, leaders, more to the point, Governor, saying, well, boy, he's going to go full bore now after our benefits and really try to kill us off if he wins.
No, the great thing we're going to do, and we've seen it in other states that have been able to do this, is we're going to reward excellence. We're going to be able to be in a position where we can hire and fire based on merit. We're going to be able to pay great employees, particularly in our schools. I mean, in the past, I've got 2 boys who go to a public high school here in the state of Wisconsin. At their school, there was no way to differentiate between a great teacher and a teacher that needed some assistance. Now our schools all across the state can really focus in on merit and performance.
How are those boys treated at school?
Actually, surprisingly, very well. It's a great example. I think the overwhelming majority of teachers in our state
So they're not picked on? You haven't had family members picked on?
Well, not at the school. My kids were targeted on Facebook by protesters. They got all sorts of grief. We had thousands of people bussed in from outside of our community in front of our home. But at our school, with their friends, with their teachers, with their principal, who's just been exceptional, they've been just Matt and Alex, not just the governor's.
But what do you think of all this outside interest? Critics have said of yours, you've got all these outside investors, billionaires, Sheldon Adelson, and et cetera, et cetera. The other side has plenty of union interest coming from service workers, AFL-CIO teachers, on and on and on. A very small fraction from in this state.
Yeah. In our case, the interesting thing is more than 70% of our contributions came from people who gave us $50 or less. So whether it's someone here in Wisconsin in Beloit, or it's someone just across the way in South Beloit, just over the state line in Illinois, they're people who understand what's at stake here. They understand that if they don't stand up and help our campaign out, the stakes are that high because we're being attacked by those special interests.
Let's say you lose, though, and you say what's at stake here. What will happen? What do you fear happens that brings a Nikki Haley here or a Chris Christie here or Bobby Jindal?
Right.
What do they say or tell you and you them that's going to lead to some apocalypse?
Oh, I think it's a combination. It's both the practical things that we see. The mayor has no plan for economic development, no plan for budget, so we have to assume.
Well, his first goal, he says, would be to rescind your
Right, that's the only thing he
issue.
said. He said nothing else about how you'd balance the rest of the budget. Because the reality is, if people didn't use our reforms, what would happen in Wisconsin is what we see happening in real time in Illinois. They raised taxes on individuals 67% and on businesses 46%. They've now, a year later, the budget's even worse off, and the governor's proposed closing 14 state facilities, laying off thousands of public employees. They're cut more than $1 billion out of Medicaid. Those are all horrific choices that places like Illinois have to make.
So you say even if he were to win, he would have to be addressing these same issues?
Well, right, for all the talk out there, there's not collective bargaining would only make it more difficult to balance the budget. What we did was make it easier to balance the budget at both the state and the local level. We're actually getting things in a way that moves forward. But in the larger context, I think beyond Wisconsin, why many of my fellow reform-minded governors are here in the state of Wisconsin over the last couple of weeks helping us out is they understand that this is really a sign about whether or not elected officials will have the courage to take on these tough issues.